Hey everybody, Ian from Novel Music here, and today in this video we're going to look at Chronology, which is one of the two clock devices that ship with the Seeds collection. So it can be used to drive our sequencers, polymath, and model, but it also can be used as the standalone device to connect with your drum racks in live, or actually any MIDI device. So let's take a look. The device has 4 clocks and one main clock, and each of the 4 clocks runs at a division of this main clock. So that's the first thing to understand about chronology. And to demonstrate that, let me put the main clock to a quarter note pulse. We're only going to listen to clock 1, and something divided by itself, divided by 1, is the same thing you put in. So we should be getting quarter note hits here on this clock. Let's hear that. Great. Now, if I divide that by 2, it should be half that speed. Great, and divided by 3, every 3 beats we should hear it. 4. And so on. Now, this wouldn't be terribly interesting if we only did this at a quarter note value. So the default when you load Chronology is the 16th note main clock pulse. And you can see I get lots of interesting rhythmic interplay and syncopations, and that's the main concept. Now you can see that this is actually itself a sequencer that has filled in steps, so we can actually design a pattern that we like. We can change the number of steps in that pattern. We can shift the pattern around. So it's taking the same shape and just pushing it down or up depending on which direction I'm moving the shift function here. The sequencer itself operates in 2 different modes. Manual, which is the default, where you can freely choose the pattern itself, the trigger pattern, or Euclidean. So Euclidean rhythms are popular. You'll find in many drum machine devices and sequencers these days. What's the idea is to find the most equidistant spacing of hits or fills within a set number of steps. So right now we have 8 steps and 8 fills, so they're all filled in. That's the most equal spacing, obviously. If I move that to 4 fills within 8 steps, then you can see this is the most equal spacing. And it gets interesting when you try, again, things that are not divisible equally, like 7 or 5. And it's interesting to see how the algorithm parses that out and deals with that. This is the most mathematically equidistant spacing of 5 fills within 8 steps. And again, this can be shifted around. And one thing that's nice is, let's put it to 4 now. If I adjust the number of steps, it automatically updates and recalculates what the most equidistant spacing of 4 fills is, in this case within 6 steps. And so it's constantly updating. So you can play around with this until you find something you like. Now, the note itself that's being triggered is decided down here. So the default is C, C sharp, D, D sharp, and it's C MIDI note 36, which is typically and at least in Ableton Live, the lowest note we use to trigger bass drum sounds. Now, in this case, I don't really want to use the tambourine sound, so let's pick a different sound. I'm going to trigger instead the E note. Now I'm getting a nice sort of shaker sound with this kit. And again, I can play around, figure out the pattern that I'd like. You can freely choose to have 1 clock working in Euclidean mode or 1 working in manual. You can mix and match as you wish. Why don't we get them all going? That's a snare. And this sound here, I'm going to change it again. Let's make it the hi-hat, and maybe we'll make it run faster than it was. You can see that we have a mute function here, so you can mute any one of the clocks if you don't want to send that output. We also have the option of choosing the output port, and this is through the hub system, which also ships with the seeds collection. So it's a set of 26 ports alphabetically labeled, and the default output is W, X, Y, Z for clocks 1, 2, 3, and 4. Over on Polymath, for instance, here I have a Polymath loaded, you can see that my clock inputs are W, X, Y, and Z by default as well, just so that there's a little less setup if you just want to load these onto your live set and start working immediately. But if I start adding different clocks, you see I get different speeds going because the pulses work together to drive the sequencer. So over here in the main settings, we have, of course, play, which enables and disables playback of the device. Through would allow MIDI notes to go through. So if I have this stopped and I play MIDI note 36, I'm getting now the bass drum myself. If out is not on, then the MIDI notes will not be, that are generated by the sequencers here, will not be output through the device. So if you want to use this as a standalone, note that it's with this off, it still works just fine sending the clock information to Polymath. But if you want to send the MIDI notes out of the device to the next thing in the chain, in this case this drum rack, then you have to have out selected. The main clock, we have from a 30-second note all the way to as slow as a whole note. So there's a whole range there. I think the typical setting would be a 16th note. Trigger sets how often we're going to hear notes triggered, or beats triggered in this case. The way the trigger works is not completely random. It actually favors, if a quarter note can be divided into 4 16ths, it favors the first and third 16th notes in general. Swing is a function that will sound quite different depending on how you have your clock set. Anything not divisible by 2 or 3 produces somewhat strange results, although they may be desirable. I've muted now the third clock, which was divided by 5, but turning this up increases the amount of swing. And I find that adding even just a little bit really actually sort of humanizes the groove that comes out of chronology. Reset is a parameter that controls when the 4 clock sequencers should be set to the first beat. So by default, this is turned off so that they are free to run, which means that the first beat, the first step of each sequence on each clock, may not always coincide. In fact, they won't if they are set to different values. However, if you set this to bar, and I turn the click on here, note that the pattern becomes more regular, and in fact it coincides with the 4/4 bar in Ableton Live. Other options include random, which will reset itself randomly. And then we have from there values 1 numbered to 16, which represent quarter note beats. So if I do 3 beats, I get a 3-beat pattern. Random is simply a way to quickly generate different patterns, and it will respect if you are in the manual or Euclidean mode, so it won't actually pop you out of that. And the big X here is to clear and reset things back to its original value. The push button here is a way to enable or disable the custom push mode that ships with this device. If you have a push 1 or 2 controller, then there are additional options to work with the sequencers on the 64 pad grid itself without having to come to the computer. I'll do a separate video detailing how that works. Lastly, you can always click on chronology here and look at the current version number that you're using, and also take a look at novelmusic.org by clicking on the logo. Thank you for checking out this video, and I hope that you'll find this as fun as I do to play around with and generate all kinds of rhythmic patterns and complex things, and using it as a way to drive multiple elements within your live set in the seats collection. So I'll continue to do these videos. Please consider subscribing and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.